All right, so I should be recording. Excellent. And I'm going to admit folks in the waiting room.
Oops. All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started here in just a minute. So good to see all these familiar names, all these all-stars in the grain chain. Hi, Julianne. Hi, Taylor. Hi, David. Stephen. So good to see you.
Hello.
Good morning.
You can actually see me now. How's it going?
Great.
Good.
David tuning in. Hi, Laura. All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. We've got quite a big agenda for today. Welcome, everyone, to the October 6th regional call. I know most of you, but we are recording this for YouTube, so just to those of you I haven't met, my name is Abba Kaiser, and I'm thrilled to be here today with Kelsey Green to host this call with our special guest, Bob Bruggeman. And we'll get into some intros in a second, but before we do, I just want to acknowledge the land that I'm on, traditional Makah, Chimichum, and Klallam peoples' traditional lands out here on the Olympic Peninsula. This is my friend, Cluatl, Walter McQuillan. He's the Makah chief. He is very generous in sharing his traditional ways and educating the community at large on their traditional lands. And just want to give a big shout out to Walter and his family for sharing their fish with us and for just being such a good friend of the community. So thank you. You can also find out whose land you're on by texting your zip code to this phone number, 855-917-5263. And if you want to go ahead and do that and post it in the chat, I can, I'm going to back up and get that number in as well in case you want to engage in this exercise to see whose land you're on. You can post that in the chat with your name, your location, and what your role in the grain chain is. And we'll be posting the chat as well at the end on our website. So here is just a quick overview of the call. I'm going to do a little bit of an intro and then we're going to pass it over to Kelsey Green in just a moment. And we're going to hear from Bob Bruggeman and all of the work that's being done at the lab out in Pullman. And we'll follow that with some open announcement time and just hangout time. If it was 5 o'clock, we'd all be drinking a local whiskey or beer, but it's not quite that time at this point. So we'll wrap up at that point and come back together. So just a little bit about me again. I'm Abba Kaiser, project manager for the WSU Food Systems program. My boss, Lois, is on the line today. Hi, Laura. She's the statewide director of the program, and we help connect people across value chains to build regional economies in the Northwest. We've been lucky enough to steward the Cascadia Grains Initiative for the past 6 years, and I'm thrilled today to be introducing you to the new coordinator of the initiative. I'm going to be still involved, but taking a back seat to the leadership of Ms. Kelsey Green, who's on the call with us today, and I'll let her introduce herself and take it away from here.
Great. All right. Well, thanks, Abba. It is such an honor to be here, and I'm so excited to join up with this group and meet all of you. I'll just do a quick introduction and some background. I know, like Abba said, we have a full agenda today, but I would love to connect with each of you individually, so please reach out. My contact information will be at the end of today's call. So I have worked with WSU Extension, San Juan County, and Cascadia Grains for, gosh, I don't know. I was thinking must be at least 5 years. It feels like quite a while. I started in the islands with Brooke Brower. I know many of you worked with him, and then found my way to Laura and Abba. And I volunteered with Cascadia Grains for a little while, and then I came on as assistant coordinator. And as Abba said, I'll be taking the lead this year. So very excited for that. My background is in environmental systems, both my undergrad and master's degrees. And I worked as a field biologist and then, transitioned to more nonprofit conservation work, and then started to segue into working with, small scale farming programs with conservation districts and such. So often I've been working in an outreach capacity. And in 2018, I took a position in the Yakima Basin, working with a coalition on a water resource management plan. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan. And I'm currently still in Central Washington, but I have transitioned to working in a consulting capacity, really focusing on food and farm clients. So I'll be doing communications, marketing, stakeholder engagement for that. And yep, as Ava said, I'll be taking the lead on Cascadia Grains 2022, and just really delighted to be here and work with all of you. Thanks. All right, let's see. So I think most of you are very familiar with Cascadia Grains, but just in case you're new to the call and the effort, Cascadia Grains began in 2013 with the intention of connecting farmers, processors, resource providers, policymakers, all these folks together. And the original effort was created as a sister event to the very successful grain gathering. And the first one took place in Tacoma, Washington in 2013. So, 8 years or so later, over 2,000 attendees, 180 classes, all these sponsors, and still going strong. Of course, things are shifting a little bit because of COVID, but we're excited to see how this effort is going to grow. And this slide really shows the 6 guiding shared values that were identified as being the most important to participants in 2020. So as you can see, these include taste and flavor, cultural relevance, environmentally sound practices, domestic, local, and regional markets, health and nutrition, and equitable access. Abba, is there anything else you want to mention on that slide? Okay, so moving right along. So this is a link, looks like it might be a little stuck on my screen, but this is what you'll see is a link to a discussion listserv that was created by the WSU Food Systems team to help keep the Northwest regional grain community strong during the COVID-19 resilience efforts. So you're welcome to use this link if you'd like to post and connect to a larger stakeholder audience. This is an opt-in, unmoderated, reply all discussion list. Right. And then while we focus our work quite a bit in the Northwest region, we have partners throughout the nation. So you can see here that we collaborate with folks all over the place, including, Grow NYC, the Artisan Grains Collaborative, Maine Grain Alliance, and so many more. Very exciting. All right. Well, this is my special project shout out. So I'll be facilitating the steering committee to help shape Cascadia Grains effort for 2022. And today is actually the deadline to apply or nominate someone. So I know I've roped a couple of you in already, but I would love to work with you. So if you are interested, please reach out, follow the link, or even nominate someone else by the end of today. Excellent. Well, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to our presenter today. Bob, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, and we are so excited to hear your update.
All right, thank you. Let me get this set up here really quickly. All right, how does that look?
Looks fabulous, Bob.
Okay, so quick introduction. I'm Bob Bruggeman. I usually would say the new barley breeder at WSU, but I'm not sure. I've been here for 2.5 years now, so I'm going to start transitioning away from saying that. But I'd really like to thank Abba, Kelsey, and Laura for giving me this opportunity to present what kind of the new developments in the malt and food variety work that we're doing at WSU and the WSU barley breeding program. So to start off with, I guess I need to be able to advance my slides. That's not working.
And while Bob's getting set up there, just a quick reminder that I just posted the tiny URL in the chat for nominating yourselves. as well. Totally okay to nominate yourself for the steering committee. Just want to say that.
Sorry about that. I guess I had a lag there. But I just want to start off just with a quick overview of the process of the barley breeding process. So we have a spring and a winter malt barley breeding program now at WSU. And so when I came in, we kind of wanted to move really towards malt and food barley varieties. I know my predecessor, Kevin Murphy, was really moving the program in that direction, but there was some deficiencies that we needed to address. And so when it starts out with the breeding process, it's really choosing parents with high breeding value for important characteristics, hybridizing those varieties to develop this diversity, and then making selections. So that's the breeding process in a nutshell. And so the number one thing that we really wanted to focus on both our malt and food barley varieties was quality, quality, quality. And that's really important because as we move varieties down the pipeline, they have to have that quality to be accepted by, the end users and the consumers as well. And so with that, I'll talk a little bit more how we're moving in that direction, but also there's this, broad adaptability, and that's the agronomics behind the varieties that we're developing. And with climate change, it's really kind of thrown a monkey wrench in that. We're really focusing on things like water use efficiency and heat tolerance. And you can understand after a year like this year, why that's very important. And then on the winter side, really to get the growers to accept our varieties, especially on the east side, they're going to have winter survival. So we're bringing in some genetics from Ohio State University to really bolster that part of it, and seedling vigor. And then, there's also really important added value attributes like flavor, which is something that my predecessor really did a lot of work with, and we'll build on those genetics. And then for a variety to be grown and be sustainable, it's got to have disease resistance. And I mean, that's really important, especially in organic growing systems where we don't want to be spraying a lot of fungicides. And, my career, a lot of my work was in disease resistance. So it's something that we're continuing with and doing a lot of work in that aspect. So, what directs our selection of characteristics that are going into that? I mean, producers obviously want varieties that are profitable and provide a benefit to their cropping system. And barley is a great, rotational crop for adding to soil sustainability and really being a crop that adds to, those ecosystem services that are occurring in the soil. The end users obviously need a high quality malting and food barley that's enhancing their product, and it's got to be affordable, and they also want it to be sustainably produced as well. And then obviously the consumers want something that pleases their senses and that is, also produced in a sustainable manner. So as we're collecting the parental material to go into our breeding program, these are all things that we're always paying attention to as we try to develop varieties. And so in the process of the breeding, selections in the field, it's tedious, but I mean, it's easy compared to the quality side of things. So like if we're walking this field, for example, this is a field of over 10,000 malting lines that are coming down the pipeline from these crosses. You can easily see why we painted this one and selected versus the ones around it, because it has the agronomics. Even a year like last year where we had all the drought, all the heat, this line obviously produced well, so we selected it. But the real bottleneck when you're moving those varieties down the pipeline is getting that quality data. And so to address that problem, we were able to secure funding from the Washington Grains Commission to acquire all of the cutting edge instrumentation to get the WSU malt quality testing lab up and running. And I'm happy to announce as of last week, we are up and running. It was quite a process concerning COVID and things, getting these machines from overseas and just getting the lab ready, set up for these odd electrical configurations. But we're in the Vogel Plant Biosciences building right across from the stadium at Pullman, Washington. And so with the malt quality analysis lab, really the heart of the lab are these two machines right here. And this is our micro malter and kiln. And there are these machines that enable us to very tightly regulate what happens during the malting and kilning process, so we can emulate what's occurring in the craft malting facilities, as well as the large, commercial malting facilities like Great Western. And this is really important for us in the breeding program, because we're able to malt multiple lines and be able to get data coming straight off the field. And that was a bottleneck before, because we relied on the lab in Madison, Wisconsin, and we could only get data for about 400 lines per year. And that data came so late that it was difficult to use it in our selection process. The other machine that's kind of the heart of this lab is this programmable mash bath. And what it enables us to do is emulate brewing at this micro scale, where we're able to brew 32 lines per week, and then get what we call the Congress wort or the experimental wort off of those, and measure the really important aspects of what makes a quality malt barley. And one of those really important ones is extract. And what extract is it tells us how much of that actual grain can be converted into beer or distillates. And so amazingly, when you look at a grain, you wouldn't believe it, but for a quality malt barley, 80% of that starch within that grain is broken down into simple sugars and becomes beer. So you have to be able to measure those to be able to know that this is a quality malt barley. And then we're really excited about this machine. It's a robot, basically. It's the gallery analyzer. And so we can load those worts and those into this machine, hundreds of them per week, and get the analysis off of it within hours. And so it really is a boon for us, because as far as what we can malt in the micro malter versus what we can analyze is quite different. And so that allows us to be able to provide a third-party analysis as a service to the craft industry. And so this is pixelated here, but this is the flyer that we brought down to the Craft Brewers Conference a couple of weeks ago, kind of advertising that we're open for business. And so with that, I just want to introduce, many of you maybe have met and are aware of what Aaron McLeod has done for the craft brewing industry. So he had this idea that there was a void in the analysis of craft malts and craft beers, because they didn't have, the infrastructure to be able to analyze their malts and beers. And so he started, he was the founder and director of the Hartwick College Center for Craft Food and Beverage. And so he, as he says, he had this idea in his heart to produce this lab to service the craft industry in the US. And so he started the center. It was a huge success. And he was able to get enough business that they were getting too many lines in or malts in to be able to provide the service for everybody. So he moved on to wanting to start this network of malting or analysis labs. And now there's 4 online currently, we being the 4th. And so we'll be able to service the Pacific Northwest for the craft industry to do these analyses. And it was our pleasure to have him here all last week, training us in on all of the equipment, getting us up to speed, and so that we're within and exceeding the parameters to be able to be part of this network. And so it was great to have him. And also when he was here, he was the presenter for the first annual Advanced Malt Quality Workshop that we held on October 1st. And it was a huge success. We had a nice audience that was pretty diverse, everywhere from producers, maltsters, brewers, and researchers. And he put on a great show, and we learned a lot from him. So this is something that we would like to hold annually now. We'd probably move the date so that it coincides with our field season, so we can have kind of a production all the way through the brewing and distilling process, and have that grains to glass type of a workshop. So when we're talking about the quality, you can understand that we have the tools for that. But when it comes to water use efficiency and drought and heat tolerance, we're bringing in genetics from all over actually the world to be able to do that. But you not only utilizing genetics, but avoidance. And one of those is the reason, that is the main reason that we're starting the WSU winter barley breeding program, because winter barley is able to utilize that trapped moisture in the soil. And it also avoids the heat during maturation during the summer that allows you to be able to have a better chance at providing or producing a quality barley. And I have to thank Patrick Hayes at Oregon State University and Eric Stockinger at Ohio State University for providing me with their advanced malting and distilling lines so that we could put out our first test plot last year. This is planting in 2020 in the fall, and this is the crop that we produced, or the yield trials that we produced out in the field, and we took all the data that we needed off of that to start selecting parents to bring into our breeding program, our winter barley breeding program. And then there's attributes like flavor, and Kevin Murphy and his PhD student, Evan Crane, really did some great work on developing malting varieties that showed some significant levels of favorable flavor compared to like Copeland, the North American barley standard. And so, I mean, they're building upon this movement of brewers and consumers, you know, wanting craft beverages that please their senses, and that barley can really contribute to that profile. And it wasn't something that we really thought of previously. And so they have these nice varieties that they built upon, and they weren't able to make the AMBA recommended list, which is the American Malting Barley Association recommended list, but we're able to build on these genetics and put those into our program to move those forward. And hopefully we can start getting varieties that make this recommendation, but also have these flavor attributes to them. And one of the fun things about, you know, craft is it provides the opportunity to develop unique things. So something that we're working on now, it might seem a little gimmicky, is this crimson and gray barley varieties. And there's been some interest in colored barley varieties from Westland Distilling and some of the maltings people that they want to look at these. And so you can understand why this would be interesting. It's crimson and gray, go Cougs. And so we're taking this crimson colored barley and this gray colored barley, and we're putting them, this is one of our crosses where we have it into a malting background. And so it's something that's fun for all of us to play around with and develop things that are really focused towards the craft industry. And with that, I'm probably running out of time. Also, disease resistance is really important for actual, you know, production and sustainability. So we're not spraying fungicides. And one of the important diseases that we're working with currently is stem rust. And so when we showed up here, rust hadn't been a major problem in the Pacific Northwest. I worked on it here at WSU for about 15 years and never actually seen it in the field, but it's becoming a perennial problem on barley and wheat varieties. So we assayed the population of stem rust in Washington State and identified a big concern was that the most virulent isolate previously in North America, when you had the RPG1 gene, which is shown here, it was very resistant. When you put the pathogen on, it has the genetics to stop the disease very efficiently. When you have both RPG1 and RPG4/5 in that material, it stops the disease. And these are the only two resistance genes that are deployed basically in any barley varieties across the world. However, these new isolate, this one that we collected off Lyon and Spokane called LSP21, 10% of the isolates in Washington State are virulent on these two genes, as you can see by these two pictures here. So that's very concerning. And so we're making it a push to not only work on stem rust, but other important diseases to incorporate resistance to the populations of those pathogens within the state. This is a irrigated inoculated stem rust nursery where we planted out the World Barley Core Collection. That basically consists of about 1,200 barley lines that represents all the diversity in the primary barley germplasm pool collected from across the world. We're able to utilize that with these inoculations and these virulent isolates to identify new sources of resistance to this new population of stem rust. And over here is what we call a Manhattan plot. And you can see that we're able to use association mapping to identify markers that are associated with these new sources of resistance, which we are currently putting into our breeding program. So with that, I just will take any questions if you have them. And obviously this is a team effort, and this is my team as the barley breeding and molecular genetics program at WSU. Actually, I'm proud to say that Ghazala here and Sham just recently took assistant professorship positions at South Dakota State University, so they're no longer with me. And this picture was taken pre-pandemic, as you can see, because none of us are wearing masks. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
All right, I'll go with a question, Bob. I'm Pryor Garnett. I grow grain in Western Oregon, the Willamette Valley. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So I've actually just put in 10 acres of barley, winter barley. One of them from Pat Hayes and another from Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious whether any of the work you're doing is focusing on growers west of the Cascades in the heavier rainfall areas. Most of the slides I saw looked like they were up in the Palouse.
Yeah, actually, we'd like to collaborate with putting our varieties over there for testing. I mean, obviously, when we're talking about the winter varieties, that's something that Great Western really wants to look at, is they're very interested in winter varieties. And you probably have Thunder in as one of Pat's lines, I'm assuming. But going down the pipeline, that's something that we'll start taking a look at, is focusing on, you know, whether these varieties perform well under those conditions on the western side. And obviously, as far as winter survival, that's going to be a lot easier problem to tackle. So, I mean, it's going to be bringing in some good disease resistance, because I mean, really a lot of the diseases that we're focusing on are a much bigger problem on the west side than they are on the east side. So, I mean, I know that in the production systems there's a lot more diseases. And I had a slide showing all the ones that were important, but I was cutting slides to cut things down. But yeah, so I mean, we will definitely be focusing on that market as well. But I think the first thing we have to do is bring in quality. I mean, just like Pat Hayes's program, not until he got his micro malter was he really hitting the benchmark on quality. But soon after that, you know, he brought out Thunder. I don't know if he's going to release Lightning, but I mean, he's got some really good material coming down the pipeline. And Great Western is a huge backer of those varieties now. And I know Amba loves Thunder. And when Aaron was here, he was thrilled with Thunder. I mean, we didn't have that intermediate variety before.
Actually, Bob, I did grow Thunder a couple of years ago. I'm organic, by the way, and that makes a big difference as well. And 5 of the acres I just put in are Lightning. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh, okay. All right, great. So you have Thunder and Lightning in.
Right,
Okay.
right. Quite the weather.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I have a question here in the chat box. I'm happy to read it out, unless Copperworks would like to read it.
Sure. I'm Jason Parker from Copperworks Distilling. Hey, thank you. This is very exciting. We've been, following your progress these years. We talked a long time ago about the timeline to get the ideation of a new product into the pipeline. How long does it take? And it used to be even fast tracking was about 10 years. With all the equipment, the micro malting, the micro kiln, et cetera, do you think that can go a little faster?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we're able to get this malting data off in real time now. It's not something where we have to send it off to Madison, Wisconsin, wait until after we've already made our selections and planted the material before we know what the malting data is. So that's certainly cutting into the process. But we're also using molecular markers and genome-wide selection and marker-assisted selection to actually select for disease resistance, also for malt quality parameters. So it's going to be really cutting into the process, and also being able to fast track some of these lines. We're working with the university. Before, you had to have 3 years of variety testing data before you're able to release a line. And I understand that that's very important. But I think there's ability for us to be able to get malt quality data off in those early generations, and for us to go from that 1 year to be able to put that into a replicated trial on our part, which would cut 2 years off the process. And if they do well in that replicated trial across a couple environments, produce enough seed to be able to get that into variety testing a lot sooner. So we currently have a line that we're really excited about. It has broad adaptability. It comes from 2 parents that have really high malt quality. We're also bringing in the non-GN gene into it. So, I mean, you'll be interested in something like that, obviously. And then, so we're trying to be able to produce enough seed in the greenhouse so that we can get that in replicated trials this year and then in variety testing next year. And if we can get it down to maybe having 2 years of variety testing data before release, I know you don't want to jump the gun too much, but I think it's something that we can do and cut that down to 5 to 6 years before release rather than 8 to 10. And I mean, it's still a tedious process. But with the winters, that's still difficult because it's such a long period and generation. So on the spring side, yes, we'll see on the winter side.
Great, thanks. I see another question from Kyle. Are you looking at scald and winter barley?
Yes, we are. We just have a paper coming out where we looked across the varieties coming out of the Middle East to identify new sources of resistance to scald. This paper is actually being published currently, and we're starting to bring that resistance into our material. And so there's 3 scald resistance genes that we're going to start bringing into our material. So we are looking at it. And it's something where we'd love to have a scald nursery on the west side so we could assay our disease. Similar to our stem rust nursery that we put in here on the east side, we had to put that under irrigation, and we also had to inoculate it this year. Otherwise, we wouldn't have seen any disease. So, I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into developing a consistent nursery, but I'm assuming that if we put these in on the west side, it's going to be a pretty consistent nursery for us to look at our material as it comes down the pipeline.
Bob, following up on that, how big does a nursery have to be?
A disease nursery?
Yeah. How much land do you need?
Probably at the max a 1/4 acre. We just use short rows, but they're replicated, and it depends on how many lines we put in. Our stem rust nursery is blowing up, but that's because we're collaborating with Oregon State University to look at their material, Montana State University, and we're also developing a bunch of breeding populations. But I mean, a nursery where we can screen our materials doesn't need to be that big. If you have an area on the corner of your farm, we'd love to collaborate.
It's exactly what I was thinking. I have what I call my 1.5 acre playground, which is where I grew out a few barley lines a couple of years ago, including Thunder.
Oh, okay.
I could set aside a little piece of that for you if you needed it.
That would be great. And scald's consistent there or on the winters?
No, not really.
Oh, not really.
Although I can promise you more than my neighbors have because again, I'm organic, so I can't spray anything.
Yeah, and so we get a little apprehensive. I mean, it's great to put in a nursery, but we don't want to come into your production area and start inoculating and cause an epidemic. So that's why these inoculated nurseries, we're trying to keep them away from production areas because you don't want to cause problems for anybody.
Okay, maybe not.
Bob, this is Julianne with Kevin's Lab. I think Taylor's already been in touch with you, but this is also a good question for everyone else here if they're interested in alternative grains for malting, so not barley. And what's your capacity to run crops, say like buckwheat or proso millet through your lab?
We are working on actually being able to run those analyses. I know Aaron McLeod had run the millet for you guys previously. So he's going to stay on as a consultant. And that was one of the main things that he's going to work with us. He's never done buckwheat, I don't think, but I'm not sure. So, I mean, those are things that we'll have to work through as far as the analyses go and what suite of analyses that you really need for millet and buckwheat. And I'm assuming that you're going to want to have obviously the extract, but I'm not sure like things like beta glucan or, all the parameters that you're really looking at. And so Aaron is going to be in consultation with us constantly moving forward. And those are two of the things that are on the list. We didn't get to it last week because, but he's going to help us out with that.
Awesome. How much of each of those crops do you think you need to play around with pounds wise if we were to get you some to try to?
Well, at the micro malting level, he looked at the screens that we have and he said, they're perfect for millet. The question is what suite of analyses you need to do. We have this ability to do smaller amounts in these T-balls so that we can run more, but it really just matters how much, wart we need to get to be able to put it on the gallery analyzer. I mean, if there's 3 or 4 parameters you're looking at, we could, scale it down and do a lot more lines at smaller amounts. But if we have to use the full baskets, which will work for the millet, I mean, that's the same thing that Aaron's used and the holes aren't too small or too big. It's probably going to be about 200 grams, but that's something we have to talk with Aaron about because he's done it and we didn't. He knows that's on our radar and that we need to actually get the protocols for that, what he's used previously, and then we can give you a firmer number on that. But I think it's not going to be more than 200 grams.
That's great. Awesome. Thanks.
Yep.
All right. Any last questions for Bob? Oh, I do see one that just popped up in the chat. Chris, did you want to ask Bob this question, or I'm happy to read it out for you if you like? Okay, I can read it. Let's see. Oh, mic is broken. Okay. The question is, how could craft brewers help varietal efforts, development efforts? Is anyone doing wider than the individual lab scale qualitative sensory evaluations to follow along with this development? Quality is not just extract, as you say, but how to get wider input on sensory flavor quality. Sensory eval on the malt is a great step. Sensory evaluations on a standardized brewed product from that malt seems like a good follow on to that. Who's doing that besides ABI and MMC?
That's something that we'll look into in the future. And I mean, I understand that, it's a question of why we're focusing so much on quality to start off with, but we need to be able to bring that into the program and get it set in our program so that we can actually have marketable varieties on larger acreages. And I mean, the Lewis County rail spur and the talk that was given by Stefan yesterday in the Crops and Soil Sciences Department was a great, I guess, example of, there's still this gap in market, right? I mean, the toll malting is only going to go so far. But I mean, if we want to open up the market for bigger markets, and even in Lewis County, it sounded like, I mean, Stefan can jump in here if I misstate anything, but even on those small acreage farms and that facility, storage facility, for the most part, most of that is still being directed towards Great Western. And so even on that smaller scale, we're going to have to meet AMBA recommendations on quality. And so we will continue to work on that, but we will work on the flavor attributes. We're bringing the genetics from the material that Kevin had. But I mean, flavor is kind of one of those things where we don't know what the mark is. It's difficult to understand because every individual has a different perception. And so at some point down the pipeline, it would be nice to be able to have a standard for flavor, whether that's Maris Otter or Palmer or, 120.14, so that we have a mark that we're trying to meet. Because at this point, it's difficult to say exactly what we're after, at least for me. And if the craft industry could standardize and say, hey, this is what we want, and this is the benchmark, say this variety's flavor, these attributes, that would be huge for us because then we understand what our target is.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Bob. Thanks everyone for your thoughtful questions. And unless there's anything else pressing, we can go ahead and move into the announcements portion of the meeting. So the idea here is that everyone is welcome to give an update or an announcement on your work. And if you're If you're looking for a focus, you can talk about how you and or your organization is responding, or how you hope to be responding to the needs of small scale, environmentally sound local and regional farmers in order to support equitable access to nutritious and flavorful grains. So the idea is I'm going to do just a call on you if you want to do one, if you want to raise your hand, and if you're not sure how to do that, you can go to the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, and there should be a little raise hand function button that you can push. And then I will just call on you. And even if you don't have something specific to announce, I'd love to just meet you. And if you want to introduce yourself, that's great too. So let's see.
I know Pryor's a farmer. Pryor, do you want to go first? Not to put you on the spot. Oops.
Oh gosh, and I was just typing up my notes so I could think before I spoke. All right, fine. Yes, I'm a farmer. I am one of those small scale, I think environmentally sound, very local farmers. And I am trying to support equitable access to nutritious and flavorful grains. So I'm doing that in 2 ways, 3, I guess. First, I only sell in Oregon. I'm not big. I've only got about 80 acres of grain. That's tiny, as anybody east of the mountains knows. But I only sell in Oregon. Second, I've developed a relationship with a local distiller for my barleys, and have been enjoying working with him and them, I should say. And finally, during the pandemic, I started custom grinding very small amounts of flours for my neighbors in town, just using a little mini mill, and wheat, rye, triticale that I had all cleaned and ready to go, and had a wonderful take up from that while the home baking craze was going on during the lockdowns. And that gave me hope that maybe there'll be an opportunity to do very local, very fresh grain and flours here in Western Oregon. I'm about an hour outside Portland, and I hear there are a few bakers there.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Kelsey.
Great to meet you. All right, how about Julian?
Awesome, thanks. I'm just gonna put a plug in for a project that Taylor, Steve, and I are on. It just kicked off this fall semester. It's called Diversifying Northwestern Fields and Palettes. So it's very in line what was talked about today, and also this prompt where our goal is to address stakeholder needs, where folks all the way from farms to maltsters and brewers, food manufacturers have been approaching Kevin Murphy's lab about recommendations for proso millet and also buckwheat, whether for what varieties to grow, who to sell to, or what varieties to malt, or what farmers to connect to get these crops. And we had no information. And so we're like, well, maybe this is a great research project. So we applied for funding through Western SARE and we got it. And it's a cool project in that there's actually very little on research farm trials, on like research trials, and they're mostly on farm trials. And so working with farmer collaborators to grow subsets of the varieties of these different crops on farm. So growing out maybe like 1 or 2 or 3 large strips of these varieties that we can then get an understanding of how do they perform in nutrition characteristics, but also different quality characteristics. And that includes food functionality and seeing how well they might perform in like noodles or breads or breakfast bars, and then also in malt quality, because several of our stakeholders are maltsters and brewers. And the end of this project, we're really trying to like push our limits and see if we can get something to scale. So working with farmers that had success, really enjoyed the varieties and the crops that they grew, and then partnering with a food manufacturer that really enjoyed the products that we've been testing. And so we're trying 3 different products: a children's breakfast bar, a focaccia quick mix, and a pancake mix. And whichever one they like, we're going to try to get into a school district, because in our opinion, the best way to get diet diversification, more nutritious foods, and to get people more interested in them is to get kids interested in it too. And so that's the project. And we are definitely looking for more farmer collaborators. So buckwheat's being trialed on the west side, so west of the Cascades, and proso is being trialed on the east side. But we're not just sticking to Washington, we're also into Idaho and Oregon. So if you're interested in trialing large-scale strips of buckwheat or proso, reach out to Taylor, who's our point of contact on this project. And also, if you have grown either of these crops and have some reserved harvest, we'd love to buy and have you ship us a sample of it so we can test it for malt quality and nutritional characteristics. So that was my quick plug. Thank you.
Excellent. That was great. Thank you so much. All right. How about Jason?
Well, great. Well, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. I've already learned a lot. Just wanted to let you guys know about a couple of products that we just released using some single farm, single variety, single vintage malts. Our whiskey release 35 was the first time we'd ever released anything from Bill Meyer's farm in Colfax, Washington. So that's the Baroness grown on Joseph's Granary. That was malted at Link in 2016. And we've been growing that and making that into whiskey every year. This is the first time we've released it, the 5th time we've brewed and distilled it. And then tomorrow we're bottling what we're calling Release 39. And that one is focusing, or I should say featuring a malt from Walla Walla. It's called Genie Malt, and this is the first salmon safe certified malt that we'll be releasing. So I'm really looking forward to being able to promote that and try to work with more farmers to get salmon safe certification, and just include that in our messaging around quality malts. So thanks for this.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. And really excited to work with you on the steering committee for Cascadia Grains. All right. How about John?
Great, thank you, Kelsey. Welcome aboard. I think we met at a grain conference once, but good to have you on board in this role. Just a quick announcement. Folks know we in the city of Tumwater have been working on a project around what we call the Craft District, which is aimed at having a number of brewers, distillers, and cider makers, but it is also the home to the South Puget Sound Community College's education program. So they are doing Associates of Science in Brewing, Distilling, and Cider Making. I think actually Jason Parker has showed up a few times as faculty in that program, as have a lot of other folks in the industry been a part of that. And I'll be lobbying to have Frank Adeo, who runs that program, be part of the steering committee. So they, I think in September, started their second cohort. Their first cohort graduated, and then they got a little disrupted there with COVID, as we all did. And so their second cohort is up and running. They have a lot of their equipment in place. They received some state funding to do a CO2 capture system to capture and reuse the CO2 that was coming out of fermentation. And then the next thing is they have funding for a TTB certified lab that will be located there. And it'll be, I think, the only one north of San Francisco and west of the Mississippi or something like that. So that's a pretty exciting thing that will be coming on board in the next year. They are co-located in a building with Heritage Distilling, and Heritage had their opening about 2 months ago and is getting their production facilities up and running. So we're excited to see that started and, sort of breaking free of the COVID shackles and making things happen. So very happy to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That is exciting indeed. And thanks for joining the call. Jason, did you have a question, or is your hand up from Legacy hand? Okay.
It's my lazy hand, I'll lower it.
Like legacy. Okay. All right. How about anyone else? I don't see any hands, but am I missing any? Anyone that wanted to give an update or just introduce themselves? Chris, I know your mic is broken, but if you wanted to put it in the chat, that's great. Anyone else? Oh, yes, I saw one. All right, Stephen?
Yeah, hey everybody, this is Stephen Bramwell with WSU Extension in Thurston County. Nice to hear all the updates. I just wanted to mention a couple things, some of them on behalf of Northwest Ag Business Center. There's been with Mike Peroni, I'm not sure if he's here or not, but there was another good year out of the Port of Chehalis, producing and transloading grain, malting barley for Great Western, and then there's contracts on the books for next year. And the earlier, gosh, was it this year? It's hard to, a little bit of a time warp, but I think potentially earlier this year, I believe so, they received, the Port of Chehalis received a capital budget allotment for building out that transload facility at the Port of Chehalis, just a little shy of $2 million. So really exciting work there. Just wanted to mention that. And just in response to Bob's comment about evaluating flavor, Kevin Murphy's grad student, Evan Crane, put out one paper on the results of their consumer panel that we all wrote together that was published. We could send a link if anybody's interested. That was a controlled tasting in Pullman, but the piece that I think addresses the question somebody asked earlier about the role for community tasting. We've got another write-up for a community sensory evaluation at the City of Tumwater Brewfest a couple years ago. And so, you know, when it comes to and it was a really neat activity. It was really educational. We got 160 participants, and people were able to distinguish, flavor differences between beers brewed with different malts. But what I think is kind of neat is at the point at which Bob or any other breeder gets to the stage where they're trialing barley around the state, there's a potential to do it at scale and do, similar work where a brewer could be identified to brew up, a scale volume at a commercial scale and then get people involved in tasting and evaluating it. So just wanted to mention that. Not that paper for our experience at the Brewfest is submitted. I don't know if it's going to get accepted, but if it is, we'll certainly send it out. I think it's a good model and it's just a lot of fun too, and got a lot of people involved.
Hot tip though, don't offer cheese for beer because you get way more than you bargained for.
Exactly. Yeah, ABBA was central, food system team support was central, and yeah, we got a little bit flooded with interest.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Stephen. All right. Anyone else before we wrap up? Oh, I saw Chris, I think. Is it? Yeah, Chris.
Okay, maybe this works.
Yep.
Maybe not.
Loud and clear.
Thanks, Stephen. That was a great mention. This is an area that we are very interested in how to present the final end of the barley breeding product, of the availability of local grains to the beer drinking crowd. Along with Jason, I think we're trying to do a lot of the same things, and the other distillers and brewers out there who are actually focusing on grains. But in terms of what we're doing to try to look at the needs of small scale and regional farmers, the main thing that we're doing right now, in lieu of anything smarter, is simply to keep talking about the malts and the grains and the regions and the farms that produce them, because I still see too few breweries doing that in a consistent way. So the shout out to any other breweries that do that, all the distilleries that do that. And we'll just keep talking about the farms, the farmers, the lands, and the actual grains that we're using instead of simply appropriating them and magically calling them craft even when they aren't. So thanks to everybody.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris.
And Chris, do you want to just introduce yourself briefly for those who aren't familiar with your work?
I am Chris. I own and operate Lantern Brewing. We're a small brewery in North Seattle, and we focus as much as possible on using ingredients that are very local. And we celebrate them as best we can.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Abba. All right, we have some final wrap-up thoughts. If there's no one else, I don't see any other hands. So thanks everyone for that. All right, I'll do one last pitch for steering committee members for Cascadia Grains 2022. I know some of you are already involved and super excited to work with you. You're welcome to nominate yourself. As Abba said, there's a link there, or someone else, and I'll pester them. So that's that. And then Abba, if you want to go ahead and, pass over to you for this.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to briefly update. Some of you know that we're engaged in this work with a BIPOC leadership team to look at culturally relevant staple crops within BIPOC communities in Washington State. We're currently working to co-design a survey that's going to be going out statewide in the fall. We're working with an incredible team of advocates and farmers, researchers, and folks who are involved in policy to look at, millet, amaranth, teff, sorghum, these grains that are really important for these communities, along with a whole host of other things that we're going to survey them about in terms of their preferred foods. So if that's a work that you're interested in, it's being led by one of our colleagues, Mercy Karayuki McGee of Hockey Farmers Collective. Some of you may be familiar with her work, and you can get in touch with myself or her. I will post them both in the chat, but I just wanted to continue to let folks know that that's happening, and sort of part of my stepping into a different role is to really focus on this project and others within at the racial equity work that we are we're doing our best to contribute to. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Abba. That's great, and that sounds like really important, interesting work. All right, well, I think this brings us to the end of our meeting. It's been so fun to join up with this group. Thanks, Bob, for your wonderful presentation, and thanks to everyone for their announcements. A couple of resource links for you here and my contact information. Even if you don't want to join the steering committee for Cascadia Grains, I'd still love to connect with you. And so please reach out, and I'd love to have a call and hear about your work and what you're involved in. I have my email information there, and of course, some of our handles for social media. Any last questions or thoughts before we conclude the meeting? All right, Abba, anything else? We do have our next regional call January 5th. Go ahead, Abba, sorry.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. And I just want to say how excited I am that you're stepping into this role. You're such an incredible organizer and speaker, and I have every faith that you will continue to serve this initiative with integrity and enthusiasm. And I'm just really excited for you to be taking the torch. I would not want it to go to anyone else. So thanks for your long haul engagement and excitement. And I really hope that everybody here on this call does take Kelsey up on the offer to connect, because I know that she's going to do a fantastic job helping support this initiative. So just big ups to you, my friend. Thank you.
Oh, Abba, thank you so much. That's really sweet. Big shoes to fill for sure, but I will do my best to serve this group and the initiative. So, all right. Well, there's no last thoughts or questions. I think we can go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thanks everyone so much, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, David, for joining.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Stephen.